Thank you very much. I'd like first by saying how grateful I am to the German Federal Ministry for Protection of the Environment and for Eric for having this fantastic conference and inviting me to sum it up, because it has forced me to listen to all the panels and become much wiser. In my profession, there is a real danger that you just pop in at conferences and give your speech and pop out again. But this time, having been given the task of summing up, I've been here for the duration, and it has been truly inspirational to follow all the panel and listen to all the wise panelists. It has in fact been like a crash course in doing well by doing good, which of course is the main message of this conference. There's one word that has been used that I think we can use no longer after this conference when we talk about renewables, and that's the word burden sharing. In fact, this is not a burden to share. This is benefits and investments to share and to make. We have so many benefits to reap from an increased emphasis on renewables that it is not a burden we should share, it's benefits we should share. And you can see that on all the three parameters that the conference has been dealing with. Whether we talk of security of supply, protection of the environment, or we talk about competitiveness. Renewables give us very good and positive answers. If we look at the supply of energy security, first of all, renewables are, as we have been told, indigenous sources of energy. They are indigenous sources of energy. They are with us. I think we all concur with President Bush when in one of his famous statements he said, the big problem with foreign oil is that most of it comes from the outside. It's absolutely true. That's why I said, Mr. Minister, that I concur with that. That we know we have a big problem of depending on imports of energy. 50% for the European Union as an average. We heard of Spain today, 85% dependence. We know it will rise to 70% over the next 2 decades and go even further. And we know we are dependent on some areas and some suppliers that are not very safe. Secondly, there is, except for biomass, an almost limitless supply of renewable energy sources, solar, wind, and geothermal energy. And third, in terms of security of supply, we should note that by investing and putting a big emphasis on renewables, we develop transferable technology for the third world. Secondly, the second theme, protection of the environment. Tomorrow, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change will publish its report in Paris, the day after tomorrow. And in that report, we now know that the science is in consensus, and they have been very conservative all along, say that we now have virtual certainty that the emission by humans of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere leads to climate change, and does so in a rather dramatic way. Rising temperatures, rising sea levels, receding of the glaciers. In Europe, we are concerned about skiing in the Alps, whereas in South and East Asia, it's a water supply of 1/5 of the world population. 1.5 billion people are depending on the water supply from the glaciers to a large extent from the glaciers of Himalaya. If they disappear, then that water supply security disappears as well. More extreme weather events. We know there's a real danger of the impairment of oceanic currents like the Gulf Stream. There'll be dramatic shifts in precipitation patterns with floods and droughts and so forth. We have been blessed by having a stable climate for 10 to 12,000 years. Now we are changing the climate. It's happening now. And we know from ice core research in Greenland, for instance, that changes in climate can happen inside the time frame of a few decades, dramatic changes. And we know that the answer to the mitigation of climate change is energy efficiency and introduction of low-carbon energy sources. And renewables, of course, are very much in the forefront of that perspective. We also know that renewables, and that has been pointed out to us through this conference, leads to a reduction of other environment pollutions. For instance, 8 out of 10 of the world's most polluted cities are to be found in China. And that air pollution is not least due to the coal-fired power plants and coal-fired home heating. When we turn to competitiveness, if we get, that was the message going very strongly through all the panels, if we get the prices right, if we get the externalities included in and the future risks internalized in the prices, then renewables already today are competitive in price. Secondly, the job creation potential was pointed out. Already today in the European Union, 300,000 people are directly employed in the renewable energy industries. If we follow the Commission proposal, there can be a threefold increase in this job creation. And at the same time, we save, of course, imports of energy, and there's a huge perspective for export revenues. Third, we come with this commitment for new investments in a time when there is a great need for investments both in generation capacity and in grid capacity. We know today that most of our generation capacity is old, is outdated, is inefficient, and Europe has to invest in new generation capacity. Why not do it in renewables? We learned from one of the panels here that already today, 30% of existing investments in new generation capacity is in renewables, outdoing all of coal and nuclear. The biggest investments are made in natural gas, but this should be changed. We also know there is an enormous potential for renewables in heating and cooling. And I think it was a very strong message from several of the panels that this potential so far has not been realized, and that we need strong sectoral commitments, binding targets, in order to achieve the potential in this area. And then there is a need for grid investments, notably in transmission. There's a need for a better functioning market and more smart, more intelligent grids. This was also a strong message. Private investors are there and they will be interested, panelists told us, provided there is a stable political environment, there are favorable incentives, the conditions are transparent, and that the support systems are there to offset all the supports that are already, the subsidies that are already given to conventional energy. A better solution would, of course, be to take away all the subsidies, all the perversions in our existing system. But till that has happened, we need favourable support systems to offset the support given on other areas. Also, we need governments to invest more in R&D, panelists told us. Over the last 10 years, governments have done the opposite and reduced research and development by 70%. We need a further effort in this area. And then we need a level playing field with full market access, priority access to the grids, and we need to level the subsidies, as I mentioned before. The European Environment Agency, it was pointed out to us, has shown that today we support renewables by €5 billion a year, whereas fossil fuels are supported by €22 billion a year. And finally, we need to fight the oligopolies that have now taken over the energy market of Europe. In conclusion, we can say that we are not only talking of a win-win, we are talking about a win-win-win, a triple win situation: better security of energy supply, protection of the environment, not least with regard to climate change, and increased competitiveness and more jobs in Europe.